Your soulmate is coming to see you. But it must stay a secret. Something has been quietly moving toward you for a while now, though not down any road you could point to on a map, and not on any timeline you could check against a clock. It has been moving the way the realest things usually do. Patiently, unannounced, without asking anyone's calendar for permission. There's a reason it hasn't been said out loud yet, and it isn't the reason you might expect. It isn't because it needs to be hidden from you, or from anyone in your life who loves you. It's simply because it hasn't finished becoming solid enough yet to survive being spoken. Maybe you've felt something like that yourself lately, in ways too small to explain to anyone else. A name that surfaced in your thoughts without a clear reason. A song that suddenly meant more than it used to. The way an old photograph means more, once you understand who's in it. A night where sleep took a little longer to arrive, because your mind kept circling back to something it couldn't quite name yet. None of that has been an accident, even though it hasn't felt like anything you could hold up as proof. It has simply been the outer edge of something else's approach. Felt before it could be explained. The way you sometimes hear footsteps on gravel, before you can see who's walking, or feel the temperature shift in a room, before anyone opens the door. That's closer to the truth of the secret. This story is built around. Not a plan someone is keeping from the people who care about them. Not something you'd ever need to hide from your own friends or family. It's smaller and far more private than that. A feeling someone has been carrying close, the way you might carry something you aren't ready to test against the world's opinion of it just yet. Real things are often like that in the beginning. They ask for privacy before they're ready for an audience. Not because anyone should be deceived, but because they're still becoming sure of themselves. Your soulmate has been carrying exactly that kind of feeling, quietly, for longer than they've admitted to anyone, including themselves. Some days. Nobody around them knows the specific shape of it, not because they've been told to keep it hidden, but because they haven't found the words for it themselves yet. They've noticed your name crossing their mind in the middle of unrelated things, while making coffee, while driving somewhere ordinary, in the strange half-second before falling asleep, when the mind stops performing for anyone, and just says what it actually thinks. They've caught themselves pausing at certain songs, at certain kinds of daylight, the low gold light of early evening, the particular gray hush of early morning, at the quiet that shows up right before sleep, when the day finally stops asking anything of them. None of it demanded to be explained, it simply kept returning patiently, the way real things tend to, undeterred by being ignored, uninterested in being rushed. Don't look away yet, because what they've been quietly building is more than a feeling now. It's becoming a direction. For a while, they let themselves believe it would pass. The way most passing thoughts eventually do, it didn't. Instead, it settled in, the way a guest settles into a house, when it becomes clear they aren't just visiting. They've stopped trying to talk themselves out of it. They've started instead, letting themselves wonder what it might mean to move toward it, instead of away from it. There's a certain kind of bird that knows which way is south, long before the horizon gives it any reason to know it. Some pull in the body arriving before the mind can explain it. This has felt something like that to them. Less a decision they made, than a direction they finally stopped resisting. This didn't happen all at once. It happened the way a traveler ends up somewhere far from home, not through one dramatic leap, but through thousands of small, unremarkable steps, each one barely noticeable on its own. One quiet thought led to another, one even sitting with the feeling instead of distracting themselves from it, led to the next. A field, left alone through an entire winter, looks, in early spring, as though it turned green overnight. It didn't. It was becoming green the whole time, underneath in a way nobody was watching closely enough to see. Somewhere in that slow accumulation, without a single moment they could point to as the moment, they arrived somewhere new. They just haven't told anyone they've arrived yet. There's a reason it's taken this long, and it isn't a reason anyone needs to apologize for. Some things simply can't be rushed into being real. Not fear, not doubt, just the plain fact that trust needs time, the way roots need a full season underground, before anything is ready to be seen above the surface. Rushing it wouldn't have made it truer, it would only have made it fragile in a way that couldn't hold. The way a house built in a week, instead of a year still stands, technically, but shakes at the first real wind, and you have been walking your own quiet road this whole time, likely, without realizing how far it's carried you. The version of you reading this is steadier than the version of you from even a few months ago. You've grown more careful with your trust, more grateful for what's real, instead of what's simply available, more willing to let peace arrive on its own schedule, instead of chasing it down. Somewhere along the way, you stopped mistaking attention for affection, and stopped mistaking noise for depth. You started noticing the difference between people who make you feel wanted, and people who simply make you feel needed. And you started choosing accordingly. Even when it meant choosing less company instead of more. None of that has gone unnoticed, even from a distance you can't measure. Growth like yours has its own quiet gravity, the same way the tide doesn't need to be asked to come back in. It simply does, pulled by something too large and too patient to be seen from the shore. It pulls things toward it, slowly, the way it's supposed to. You may have noticed small things lately that didn't seem to mean much on their own. A strange sense of anticipation, with nothing obvious to explain it, an unusual pull toward closing old chapters, tidying loose ends, forgiving people or situations you'd been holding onto out of habit more than hurt. Maybe you've felt more drawn to your own company than usual, not out of loneliness, but out of something closer to preparation, the way a house gets quietly put in order before it expects a guest. None of that is a coincidence either. Readiness often arrives before the reason for it does. Some people call these things coincidences, and leave it there. Others call them signs and build a little too much meaning on top of them. The truer answer probably sits somewhere quieter than either of those. Not proof, not nothing, just the ordinary texture of a life that's shifting in a direction it hasn't fully explained to you yet. You don't need to interpret every small feeling as a message. You only need to notice that you've been feeling a little more awake lately, a little more present in your own days, as if some part of you already knows something is worth being ready for. Stay with this a little longer, because there's a specific reason. Your soulmate hasn't told anyone what they've been feeling. It isn't secrecy in the way that word usually gets used. Nothing meant to deceive anyone who trusts them. It's closer to the quiet most people keep around something still forming. You don't usually announce a hope before you've decided whether you believe in it yourself. So they've kept it close, turning it over privately, the way you might reread a letter, before deciding whether you're brave enough to send it, checking the words again and again. Not because the words keep changing, but because your nerve does. There is one memory they keep returning to, and it has nothing dramatic about it at all. It's something plain, an unscripted laugh, an ordinary afternoon, a moment where nobody was performing for anyone. Maybe it was something as small as a look that lasted a beat longer than it needed to, or a silence between two people that didn't feel like it needed to be filled. It has stayed with them because it felt honest in a way that's rare, and honest things have a way of outlasting almost everything louder. That's happened since. Every distraction, every almost relationship that filled space without filling anything real, every version of fine that wasn't actually fine. They didn't understand back then why that particular memory refused to fade, why it kept surfacing on ordinary days for no obvious reason. They're starting to understand now. Real love rarely announces itself the way stories make it sound. It doesn't usually arrive as a lightning strike or a scene out of a film, all sweeping music and perfect timing. More often it looks almost embarrassingly ordinary while it's happening. A conversation that runs long because neither person wants it to end, a comfortable silence in a car, someone remembering a small detail you mentioned once in passing, and never expected anyone to hold on to. It doesn't perform, it doesn't need an audience to know it's real. That's part of why it's so easy to miss the first time, and so unmistakable the second. What your soulmate keeps circling back to isn't a fantasy version of you. It's a real, specific, unremarkable moment that simply refused to be forgotten, which, of anything, might be the most convincing evidence that it means something. It's worth remembering the next time something real shows up, looking too quiet to be significant. The loudest connections are rarely the ones that last, and the quietest ones are rarely the ones that don't. What actually holds tends to look, from the outside, almost unremarkable, which is exactly why it's so often overlooked by everyone, except the two people standing inside it. There is something waiting for you, because what feels like distance right now is mostly just two hearts arriving at their own pace. Nothing about this needs to be rushed for it to be real. A slow arrival isn't a lesser one. If anything, the things that take their time tend to be the ones that last, the way a path worn slowly into a hillside by years of the same footsteps outlasts one that was cut through it all at once with heavier tools. The slow path doesn't erode the way the fast one does. It's shaped by repetition, not force, and repetition is what makes a thing durable. Picture someone walking a long road toward a place they haven't seen in a while, not lost, not rushing, just walking with the kind of steady patience that comes from finally knowing which direction is theirs. They aren't visible yet. There's no way to know exactly when they'll come into view, no mile marker either of you can check against, but the walking itself has already begun, and it hasn't stopped since it started. Some days the road probably feels longer to them than it does to you, since they're the one carrying the weight of not yet having said anything. That's closer to what coming to see you actually means here, not a specific date circled on a calendar, not someone en route to a doorstep this week, but a direction someone has finally, quietly chosen and started moving in, one unremarkable day at a time. If a small, doubting part of you is reading this, and wondering whether any of it is really about you specifically, that doubt doesn't need to be argued away. It's a reasonable thing to feel, and it doesn't cancel anything out. What matters more than believing every word of this outright, is simply staying open. Open enough to recognize something real. If it finally does show up in ordinary clothes, instead of the dramatic ones you might have been taught to expect. Don't look away yet, Because there's a part of this your soulmate hasn't admitted to anyone, including themselves until recently. Asterisk. They've started picturing what it might actually feel like to stop keeping this private, not through some dramatic reveal, but through an ordinary honest conversation, the kind that doesn't need an audience or a perfect script. They don't picture grand declarations, no rehearsed speech, no perfect moment engineered in advance. They picture something quieter, sitting across from you, finally saying the true thing out loud instead of just carrying it, and watching to see whether it lands, the way it's felt inside them all this time. That image doesn't frighten them the way it used to. It used to feel like too much to risk, the kind of thing easier to leave unsaid than to test against reality. Now it feels like the only honest option left. Something in them has shifted from protecting the feeling to wanting it to finally exist somewhere outside their own head, out where it can be seen, questioned, and, they hope, though they try not to lean too hard on the hoping, answered. Meanwhile, your own heart has been doing quiet work of its own, the kind that's easy to miss from the inside. You've learned that hope doesn't have to be loud to be real, and that you can hold on to something gently, without organizing your whole life around it. You've grown more comfortable with not knowing exactly how, or when things will unfold, trusting instead, that the not knowing is just part of something still finishing itself. That kind of patience isn't passive. It's one of the strongest, quietest things a person can build. The difference between waiting and simply living well, while something else takes its time. Asterisk. Stay with this a little longer, because there's a truth worth saying plainly here since the title might suggest otherwise. Asterisk. None of this is about hiding anything from the people who actually love you. Real connection has never needed anyone to be kept in the dark, and nothing genuine has ever required you to isolate yourself from the people who'd want to know you were happy. If anything, your soulmate's quiet season has been the opposite of secretive, in the way that matters. They haven't been deceiving anyone, they've simply been giving something private, the time it needed to become sure of itself, before asking it to survive, being spoken out loud. The only thing being protected here is a feeling still finding its footing, not a truth being kept from anyone who deserves to know it. If you take nothing else from this, take that. Nothing worth having ever asked you to distance yourself from the people who've earned your trust. If anything ever does ask that of you, in this story or in your actual life, that isn't the quiet, forming kind of privacy being described here. That's something else wearing its costume, and it deserves your skepticism, not your patience. There is something waiting for you, because readiness has never been about waiting by a door for someone to arrive. It's been about becoming, in your own life, exactly the kind of steady, open person capable of recognizing something real the moment it finally shows itself, instead of needing it announced in advance. That version of you isn't standing still. It's living fully, tending its own days, and simply staying unafraid of what might eventually walk into them. It looks like keeping the apartment you actually enjoy coming home to, not the one you were only planning to tolerate until something changed. It looks like calling the friend you've been meaning to call, taking the trip you almost talked yourself out of, saying yes to the dinner invitation, wearing the color you love, even though no one's told you it suits you. None of that is killing time. All of it is what a full life looks like while something else, somewhere else, quietly finds its own way toward you. Your soulmate has started imagining what they'd actually say, If the quiet ever finally became an ordinary conversation instead of a private hope. The words, when they picture them, aren't rehearsed. They're not trying to impress anyone. They're something closer to. I've been carrying this quietly for longer than I probably should have, mostly because I wasn't sure it was real. I think it is. I don't need anything from you right now except the truth of whether any of this makes sense to you too. There's nothing polished about those words, and that's exactly why they feel true to the person imagining saying them. No metaphor, no grand gesture, nothing borrowed from a film, just a plain sentence, finally let out of the place it's been kept. Don't look away yet, because what happened next wasn't dramatic on the outside, even though it changed something important underneath. One ordinary evening, sitting with the feeling, instead of distracting themselves from it, they realized the quiet they'd been keeping wasn't protecting anyone. It was just fear, wearing a more polite name. That realization didn't arrive as panic. It arrived as relief. The kind that shows up when you finally stop pretending a feeling isn't as real as it obviously is. The way it's a relief to finally set down something heavy you've been carrying so long you forgot it had a weight at all. They stopped asking themselves whether this was worth the risk of being wrong. They started asking, instead, what kind of person they wanted to be regardless of the answer. Someone who stayed quiet out of fear, or someone who told the truth and let it land however it landed. A compass needle doesn't ask permission before it settles toward north. It just stops resisting and points where it was always going to point. They're choosing the second one now, even if they haven't fully worked out how or when, not because the outcome is guaranteed. Because the honesty matters more to them than the guarantee does. It shows up in small ways first, the way most real changes do. They've started saying what they actually mean in conversations that used to get a softened, safer version of the truth. They've started finishing thoughts they used to let trail off unsaid. None of it looks dramatic from the outside, but each small act of honesty has been practice for the larger one, still waiting on the other side of it. The way anyone learning to speak a difficult truth starts with the easy ones first. Stay with this a little longer, because your own path and theirs have been quietly running parallel this whole time. While they've been learning to trust something enough to eventually say it out loud, you've been learning to trust your own instincts, without needing outside proof first. Neither of you planned this timing. It's simply what happens when two people keep choosing honesty in their own separate corners of the world. Eventually, without either one forcing it, those corners start to overlap, the way two people wandering the same shoreline from opposite directions eventually end up standing in the same place, without either one having followed the other there. It might help to remember that none of this asks you to abandon your own judgment along the way. Being open to something real isn't the same as being uncritical about it. The steadiest version of you, the one this whole story keeps describing, is also the version capable of walking away from anything that doesn't actually match its words with its actions when the time comes. Hope and discernment were never opposites. The strongest kind of hope has discernment built directly into it. There is something waiting for you, because the version of arriving that actually matters here was never about a knock on a door. It's about someone finally becoming willing to be known, fully, without the quiet management they'd been doing. For a long edits and omissions people make, when they're not sure something is safe to show yet, that kind of arrival doesn't need a secret to protect it. It only needs enough patience to let it finish forming, before it's asked to hold the weight of being spoken. Somewhere in all of this, your soulmate has made a private promise to themselves, one they haven't told anyone yet, including you. It's simply this: when the moment finally feels right, they'll choose honesty over managing the feeling quietly forever. They won't need a perfect opening, they'll just need to stop mistaking privacy for permanence, to remember that a feeling kept close for a while isn't the same as a feeling meant to stay hidden forever. A season isn't a sentence. Winter ends on its own schedule, but it does end. There is nothing here asking you to do anything right now, and nothing asking you to keep anything from anyone who cares about you. What this is really asking is smaller and steadier. Keep living your life fully, while you wait for anything at all. Keep choosing peace over urgency. Keep trusting that the realest things rarely arrive with an announcement. They arrive quietly, the way footsteps do before you can quite make out whose they are, patient, unhurried, and, in their own time, unmistakably real, once they finally arrive close enough to recognize. Picture a candle left burning in a window, not to signal anyone toward anything urgent, but simply because someone wanted the light to be there, steady and unbothered, whenever it was finally needed. Nobody stands at that window checking the road every few minutes. The candle just burns, patiently, doing its quiet job, and the house goes on living its ordinary life around it. Meals get cooked, doors get opened and closed, laughter happens in other rooms. That's closer to what this waiting actually looks like from the inside, not a secret being guarded, not a countdown, just a quiet, patient steadiness that doesn't need anyone to rush toward it to still be real. There will be ordinary days between now and whatever comes next. Days that don't feel like they're leading anywhere in particular, the kind that ask nothing more of you than getting through them. Well, keep living inside them fully anyway. Keep tending the parts of your life that are entirely yours, that don't depend on anyone else's timing to matter. Your work, your friendships, your own small rituals and quiet pleasures, the things that were good before this story started, and will still be good no matter how it ends. The waiting was never meant to be the main event. Your life, exactly as it is right now, still is. And if there's one thing worth carrying forward from all of this, let it be this: nothing true ever needed to be hidden from the people who love you in order to survive. What needed protecting, for a while, was simply a feeling still becoming sure of itself. And feelings like that, given enough patience, eventually become strong enough to be spoken in the open, without anyone having to hide anything at all. Whatever comes next, that kind of honest arrival is worth the wait. It always has been. Not because waiting is owed to you as some kind of reward, but because the things worth having rarely arrive any other way, slowly, honestly, and finally in their own good time.